the NCAA is back in court, and they've been in court during this offseason nonstop. And this is probably the most significant court case that they're dealing with right now, involving the revenue sharing, what is legally the rights of the players to earn in all of this, and basically federal law determining that what the NCAA has been pulling off for decades is illegal, and that there is revenue sharing that is earned by the players, both from a name, image, and likeness standpoint. We'll start there because that's the crux and the core of this particular court case. And so, TJ, we'll start with you. And basically, the two numbers that I've seen, I saw most recently $2.4 billion. I saw a $4.7 billion figure as well in regards to what the NCAA would be on the hook for in compensating players for their name, image, and likeness, most of which I would think would be number two, merchandising, but number one would be video games.
Essentially, if they don't come to a resolution within 40 days, which I believe that was 2 days or maybe Friday, so 3-4 days ago, they have to pay damages up to $4.6 billion. And obviously the NCAA is going to try to avoid that in any way possible, so they have to come to some form of resolution. So it seems highly probable something gets agreed to, where universities will now be given the ability to revenue share, the option, because that's how it will be. You will have an option to revenue share with your athletes, your D1 athletes, and they need to come to an agreement on a number. Right now, the number is anywhere from $17 to $22 million, and I hope it's 22 million. I think anything below 20 million is obviously an issue down the road, but there's going to be no floor. So universities will have the choice of, so that's a hard cap. So I should have clarified that. The 17 to 22 million will be a hard cap. You cannot go over that number. Now, how will they regulate that? I have no idea. It's the NCAA, so I'm sure there will be tons of issues down the road with that too. But every university will have a hard cap, and there will be no floor. So say maybe a group of 5 school, or maybe I don't know, let's use not Oklahoma State, maybe like a Washington State. Maybe they can only do 10 million, right? So that'd be the floor. They can do whatever they want. The universities have a choice, and what they should do for a university like University of Michigan, who's not all in on the pay-for-play game, one would think that this would help balance the competitive edge with some of the tier 1 level NIL programs. So it's a very interesting turn of events right now in college sports.
Yeah, actually, there's to sort of link everything together. We have this backward facing. Well, what about all the players that didn't get compensated that needs to get compensated? And we've got to figure all that out, or this has to be figured out in a legal sense. But then we have the forward facing. Do we want unfettered capitalism, which is, I think, what we have here, or do we want to have some form of socialism, which is basically what the NFL is, and basically every major sport is, where there is some sort of restriction, floor or ceiling kind of restriction, in order to kind of play in the play with the other team. So I find this really, really interesting, and a good way to level the playing field if you're at the upper end of the playing field. Let's put it that way. If it's no floor, this is the into the future view. There's no floor, but there is a ceiling.
So, guys, if I recall, based on the numbers that TJ just laid out, and some of this is coming back to me after 48 hours or so. This would roughly be about 22% of the revenue.
That's right.
That is earned currently through, was that college athletics or college football?
College. So total athletic department revenues. So, but majority of athletic departments are supported by their football programs. Some supported by the basketball program, but obviously many are running in the red anyways. Like in Eastern Michigan, for example, they're in the red with the football program. So. Again, not everyone's going to even be able to do this. So this is really going to be a have and a have not situation, where you would think the universities with the TV deals like SEC, Big Ten, some ACC, and Big 12, they're really the ones who will benefit from this ruling.
So that goes back to what Ferris is bringing to the forefront is this truly going to be a situation where this is going to be the final separation of college football, number one, from the other sports, and separation of college football within itself, that you can either hack this situation and this framework and you can support your athletes, your football players, or you can't. Therefore, you're going to play a different level of football. Or is there going to be some type of agreement to say, okay, here are some averages, and those richer programs will be able to benefit from the money that they bring in to disperse. However, there's going to be a balancing, a luxury tax of sorts, something to the degree that baseball does, just so everyone can participate to some degree, because either it's going to be determined that the Big Ten and the SECs of the world and a few other programs will run off and play their own brand of football, or they're going to lend a hand to other programs so that there can be more competition. I don't have the answer to that. And I'm sure there are various opinions out there within the power structure as to which way they want to go.
Yeah, I mean, I think the pendulum has swung very far in the direction of how can we maximize revenue. And it used to be the NCAA stood for something, in terms of the college athlete. Some peculiar situations like Washington State was mentioned. Should Washington State suffer because they didn't get lucky and get into the Big Ten at the right time, or another conference at the right time, right place, right time? How are they any better or worse than Rutgers or Maryland or something in the Big Ten that came in? And then just in terms of the players, this is supposed to be something where it's supposed to be there's supposed to be gender equity. There's supposed to be Title IX. There's supposed to be all these other things that spread across the entire athletic department. I don't know. You're not hearing much of that. You're not hearing much of that lately. So, it'll be interesting to see if football just breaks off from everything else. It sounds like this idea is a way to keep things in check, so to speak, and not let the ceiling get way too high with the haves and versus the have-nots, right? So it may be even in the same conference.
Well, really, it's a last-ditch effort to try and keep the NCAA relevant, because they know they're on their last leg, and if they don't come to some sort of resolution, this $4.5 billion or anywhere from $2 to $4 billion payout they're going to have to do will kill the NCAA. They can't do it. Tom Mars is very public about this. He's been predicting this for over a year. Who's a pretty famous attorney for those who aren't familiar with him in college athletics space. But when it comes to like the Washingtons of the world, where you had your Washington States of the world, where you're playing musical chairs, well, the reality is revenue sports, or college football is a revenue sport. And only the top programs are going to actually, they're going to survive. We're in an era now of college athletics where the big fish are the ones who are going to reap the benefits. It's just, and that happens when you're driven by TV deals and TV contracts. And I mean, we see what Fox is doing. I mean, you got the Ohio State game and the Michigan game shown on national TV. What other Big Ten school was given that? Nobody. Right? There is no equality in sports, and like that's gone. And then when you mentioned Title IX, so from my understanding, and there's a lot of gray area here because everything's not ironed out. The athletes who are going to benefit this are the revenue generating sports. So every athlete in the athletic program is not going to get compensation from this agreement with the NCAA. It will be the revenue sports that get the benefit of the resolution.
So to me, there would have to be a determination of how many schools are making that kind of money. And you would think that based on just television in and of itself, that those schools are the Big Ten and the SEC to start. And then there's quite a few that you could add from the Big 12 and the ACC that are significant revenue generating sports.
Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So does a mid-tier or a lower tier school that plays football in the Big 12 or the ACC, does Boston College generate enough money?
Right.
Sure, they generate money. They get a nice TV contract, all of that. But then to turn around and to take a portion of that revenue to pay for a football team that can compete with everybody else.
Yeah, you might see sports get slashed from athletic programs to save cost. That could happen. I mean, you would think, I mean, hypothetically speaking, you might see that down the road, right? You might see a team get cut so they can actually have a more operating budget so they can actually give revenue sharing to players, you know, because like NIL is still going to be on the table. So players are still going to be able to make money through, you know, so like, you know, your female basketball team can still get deals, right? And then, so that'll still be on the table, but you may see cutting of budgets to, you know, like you said, 20% of athletic budgets are going to be dedicated to this.
Yeah, I mean the bottom line, maybe this is kind of a sweet spot of Michigan, because Michigan, you know, we've talked for many weeks that Michigan is not going to go to the highest level in terms of dollars spent on players. So maybe some sort of cap actually, in a way, kind of benefits Michigan as long as it's a high enough cap. I think TJ, you mentioned that as well, right? That it needs to be high enough, right? So let's see what happens. You know, we'd like to think Michigan offers more than, you know, that phrase that we keep saying, transactional versus transformational. There's more than just the dollars. It's more than just the highest bidder. If that's the case, then maybe Michigan would benefit with some sort of cap that's reasonably high, that would be good enough for high enough for Michigan.
Because one determinant is the reason that the NFL and other major sports have a cap is because they're running a business.
Mm-hmm.
So the cap is tied directly to the business formula. We run a business, and if we make $1 billion this year, this percentage goes to the players. That determines the salary cap this year. Next year, we increased our revenue by 13%. 11% of that goes to whatever the formula is, goes to the players, and it enables them to run a business responsibly. Well, if this is a salary cap, but if it's being, I think this was your point earlier, TJ, that the NIL is exclusive to this, and should be, I would think, no ceiling to that. You can't take money from players if private citizens and companies want to give whatever they want to give, that should be limitless. So we're talking about money that's generated through all these other
school
facets that go outside of NIL giving.
And then, so what you were talking about, like with the NFL and the players union, what they have is they have almost a 50-50 split in revenue. And where we are talking with college football, it's going to be about 20%. But see, the next step is going to be after this, CBA, players union. That's going to be the next step down the road. And then that's going to be a whole nother headache, because they're going to find out very quickly. And these universities already know this. They know this. 20% isn't going to cut it. There's going to, once a players union gets accepted in college sports, we're going to have a whole new set of hurdles. But I think the reality of the situation is it's trending exactly where we all thought it was going to go, though. We all saw this coming, right? So we're just in the painful growth process where it's trying to find its balance. Water's trying to find its balance right now.
I wonder about the distribution of the revenue per player, and I wonder about the revenue as it pertains to schools. You just made the comment, TJ, that Fox sees where its commodities are. And so they throw Michigan and Ohio State spring games on television because nobody's going to watch Indiana's spring game on national television. So what keeps Ohio State and Michigan, once this becomes a very competitive field of dollars, who's bringing in the most dollars, how's it distributed, then why doesn't Ohio State and Michigan go to the Big Ten and give us and
more share?
Say you got to give us a larger share of this revenue because we're bringing it in. Therefore, we want to continue to win. Well, we can only win by paying players, and we're the ones generating the money. So we needed a larger distribution rate from this TV deal.
Yeah, I think that's a natural progression. And I know for a fact that internally, Michigan has already had those discussions, especially after what transpired in November with the Big Ten and what the other universities voted on to try and stop Michigan from playing football games almost. So Michigan has already internally had some of those discussions like, why are we making the same revenue share as a Northwestern? Because we carry we carry the smaller schools in the Big Ten, like an Ohio State. So, yeah, I would say that's also a natural progression that we will see down the road, just like a CBA and a players union. I think it's going to head there. And I also, Joe Klatt, I think brings up a great point. He says, yeah, there's going to be more expansion. This is why Florida State wants to get in the Big Ten, because they see this problem where you're going to be revenue sharing. They're only getting like what? I think it's like $35 million a year in their TV deal. That's not even close to what the Big Ten is going to be getting, So they're you could see Florida State joining the Big Ten. They're already trying. We'll see where it goes. But, Big Ten or Joe Klatt says you're going to start seeing teams leave the Big Ten because they're going to get kicked out.
Well, that was going to be another point of mine, that just because you're in the Big Ten or the SEC doesn't mean you're holding up, your distribution slice. Right. If you're Vanderbilt or Indiana, you're nowhere near the commodity that Florida State, Miami, Clemson, and other schools are in other conferences, lesser conferences. You're not pulling in that kind of money. Shoot, Rutgers, unless they're playing Ohio State or Michigan, they're relegated to the Big Ten network their entire season because the networks know that they don't choose to put them on CBS, NBC, or Fox. Mm-hmm. My other thought in this is if, for example, Michigan's bringing in $20 million, how do they distribute that to the players? Does every scholarship athlete get the same amount of money, or who's making a determination on the value of each individual player?
Yeah, so I think you will see different systems amongst different universities. Some might do a flat team-based salary, and others might do a tiered system. I know right now the Michigan collectives, as we speak, are looking into creating a tier system that will fit players into some type of pay scale structure, because they're running into problems with depth chart players demanding more money, which we just saw a couple players into the portal who are lower on the depth chart. So I know Michigan's currently discussing a tiered system right now. It's not in place yet, but I know that it's probably highly probable that will be in place soon.
Yeah, I don't know if it was today or recently we were kind of talking about I think it was today. Actually, it's been a long day. Tight end university, offensive line university, that sort of thing. Maybe you see teams kind of do that. Maybe you see an Iowa say, "Hey, we've got a pipeline in tight ends, and we're going to pay them in a certain level that's going to be different, and that it's going to be tight end university. We're going to be tight end university, something like that." I would think that Michigan would. I think they would pay for players that are stars more than they would pay for players that are not. I would think that's how Michigan would go anyway.
Yeah, I know seniority is going to matter. I know that's, and obviously production. I think that's how Michigan wants to do their tiered system. But I think you're right, where it comes like a freshman, how do you equate a 5-star? Like, we're in a gray area. I mean, I don't think anything's concrete right now. I think A lot of it can be subjective, and teams are going to make bad purchases, right? They're gonna invest in players who don't pan out, and it's going to happen because you can't bat 1,000. So this is where like a Sean McGee, who's now the general manager at Michigan, this is why he was brought in, because we have an evolving athletic landscape, and this is what they got to do. They got to adapt and they got to evolve now.
Now, there's a few positives here, because I'm guessing that many of the people that are listening in the chat right this second, and others that will watch the record on this, probably have the same general lean. When I say lean, I'm not talking about my principles or my thoughts. I'm talking about more about my intestinal fortitude about this, my stomach for it, which is not too tolerant, just because basically collegiate sports has been contaminated for a long time, but it's officially contaminated. And we're in a very awkward position, as TJ is pointing out, most notably because a lot of things need to be worked out, because basically what's happened is, going way back generations, you had athletics as an extension of the university. Athletics were simply just another activity. And then, of course, it became more and more popular, and crowds started showing up, and then television got involved, and it became a business. But the framework and the legislation and the structure was never business minded. It was academics minded, but it became a big business, and that it is clashed. But a couple positives, I think, for the average fan to take away, that's sick of the transfer portal, sick of players being able to leave whenever they want, and also opting out of postseason games, bowl games, would be that can all be worked under contract. And you can have that guarantee that a freshman is going to sign, whether it be a 1-year contract or a 2-year contract or a 3-year contract or whatever, and stay at the school. And also that they're committed to play for their team throughout the remainder of the season, all the way to the end.
You don't want to have to re-recruit players year after year after year. That it makes sense to have some sort of contract that lasts, that's favorable for both sides. Some level of security, but as long as certain criteria are met. Maybe that has to be that you have to be on the team, or maybe it even means that you have to be a contributor to some degree. Then you'll keep getting paid. That it makes total sense for it to be a two-way deal that lasts more than one year.
Yeah, I feel like I heard pretty recently that there was an NIL deal done with a player, where it is in their NIL deal where they do have to participate in a bowl game if they make it to a bowl game. I'm trying to remember what player that was. But I think you are starting to see teams go that path with the commitment to bowl games. I haven't seen anything where it's like, okay, a 2-year commitment. We haven't seen that yet. I don't even know if you can pull that off without a players union. I don't know if we're there yet. I think that might have to be the next step after a revenue share. But there's no question that's what's needed in college athletics. I mean, listen, we're semi-pro now. It's not even amateur sport anymore. It's just where we are. Unfortunately, the rules and regulations in college athletics is behind the current state of the sport, and now we're playing catch up. And the reason why it's so bad is because, unfortunately, leadership has failed us. NCAA has failed us. The institutions have failed us, because the dirty little secret is the institutions don't even want to pay the players. They don't want to lose money out of their athletic department. A lot of them are even reluctant to do NIL because it takes donors away from their funding and their fundraising for new buildings and practice fields or whatever, right? So, we're just in a place where there's a fork in the road and decisions have to be made.
I guess I can stomach all this if, in fact, these players, and part of their deal, because it is a university, is that they uphold all the expectations of being a student.
What do you mean? Elaborate. What do you mean? Like, so as
Go
long
to
as
class, take tests, do homework, write papers, pass classes.
I mean, aren't they already doing that though, right? So
Well, I'm not saying that they're not doing that. And I
yeah,
think the knock on the athletes is that more of them are not doing that than truly are, because most of them
yeah,
should realize that they're not going to play in the NFL.
right.
And what could ultimately hurt a lot of these guys if they're not really understanding of the situation is making $75,000 a year for 3 years and thinking that they've got, they're on top of the world when they're nowhere close to being an NFL player. And then they're sitting out on the street, and sure, they made a
Mhm.
little change and some decent money for a 20-year-old. Certainly, there's nothing wrong with that. But if they didn't parlay that into a career other
Mhm.
than playing in the NFL, then they mismanage their money, as we've seen many times. So that could be the fool's gold for a lot of sad stories upcoming.
I mean, you think about the G League, and you think about most college basketball teams, and I think the G League has better players now, probably. There are very few college basketball teams that have better players than kind of an average G League team, but nobody watches the G League. There's the affiliation with the university that makes college basketball what it is, leading up to the tournament, obviously, and all of that. So there's got to be a tie. If it's not a tie, then you kind of drift into this. Is this minor leagues for football, or what is this actually that we have? And if there is no tie to the university, that's what it turns into, right? So you would think that would be an important aspect of this. That there needs to be some association with the university. You should be able to take a class where there's a Michigan football player in it, if in theory, right?
So let's say that's not the case. Let's say that's not a requirement. Now, we do know, again, I don't know what percentage we're going to place on that the majority of these players, well, I don't know if the league becomes so exclusive that there's only 32 teams, maybe it's going to be a pretty low percentage of players that are committed to going to class and doing all those things because they know they're not going to the NFL. Of course, the more exclusive that becomes, the more concentration of future NFL players are going to be in this league. Then let's say we get to a point where that's not an expectation, that's not a requirement, and there's always going to be those players that take advantage of that ability to go to class, take tests, learn things, and they'll take advantage of that regardless of how good they are and how much of a future they have. But let's say that's a small portion, and there are just players who show up to practice and they're just connected to the university by putting on a jersey and gear every Saturday and playing football. Then you have a minor league sport, as you've just outlined, Ferris, and you have an inferior sport to the NFL. So for you two, what is your incentive and draw to watching Michigan football rather than just watching a far superior product on Sunday?
Well, I'd say for me, I'm still all in. I don't care. Morally, I don't know. Maybe my morals are a little thin, but like I don't care if these kids go to class or not. I don't care if kids get paid. Like, and like I know I'm rooting for a team that's very moralistic in Michigan because they do care. Admissions matter, grades matter, and going to class matters. But and that's okay. Like I don't have anything against that either. I'm fine either way how the path it goes. But if it does end up being where these kids are strictly athletes or employees and not students, which is what you're alluding to, Mark, um, I don't give a damn. Michigan's my team. I'm still gonna ride with them. And if you look at the other semi-pro leagues like the USFL or the UFL, um, the quality of product just isn't there. And like to Ferris's point when he brought up the G League, which is a great little like case study we can look at on the basketball side of things. Well, the NBA actually just canceled Team Ignite, which was the G League version of high school players that want to go into the G League. They ended that, and the reason why they ended that is because they cannot fill that team with enough competitive players because the players are now coming back to college basketball for NIL. They're now making enough money through NIL where playing for Team Ignite, who Scoot Henderson, if anyone follows the NBA, Scoot Henderson, who was drafted, I think, third overall last draft, he came from Team Ignite. So that team's now gone. So that pathway, so those kids are going to either have to go overseas or or go back to college. So I just think that if we go down the path of employee and not student athlete, for me, and I know, Mark, maybe you're more old school, so it matters more. But for me, like, as long as you're representing the university, I'm good. Because a lot of these kids, like, for example, like, I'm a fan of college hockey. These kids are only there a year and they're gone. They play juniors and then they like in Michigan, for example, because Michigan's basically a feeder school for the NHL. These kids are there for 1 year, like Owen Powers, drafted first overall a year ago in the draft. 1 year and they're gone. So are they really student athletes anyways? No, they're just there for development.
Those players are rare. The vast majority of players are there to play the sport and then do something else in the future. I would want college football players to have some association with the university, literally be students, literally only have 4 or 5, maybe more if there's COVID, but 4 or 5 years of the time at the university, and then they move on to do something else, whether that's professionally in the sport or they move on to do something else. I mean, I'll give you an example like Jake Butt. That's an excellent example of somebody who had a major injury and then tried different things and then eventually kind of stuck and now he has kind of a broadcasting career. So, and I'm sure a lot of people are in non-sports as well. So part of my, joy of watching Michigan is to watch these athletes, see what the next step is for them and kind of feel like, okay, they got a Michigan degree. That means something. That's my point of view. Mark, I'd be interested to hear yours.
Well, I'm very much in line with this. So, first of all, if I see the grin from TJ. So, if I had the resources to do this in the time and I knew that the video viewership would pay off, this is what I would do. I would love to see somebody do this. I would take a school like Michigan. I would want to take all the schools in the Power 5, the Power 4 now, and go back about 10 years, take all the starting players, and really any backups that were impactful, played a lot, meaningful snaps, guys that played the significant portion of the games, and determined how many of them made an NFL roster and to what degree. I don't know what that percentage is. It seems like when Ohio State and Michigan are out there, it seems like everybody's a pro. It seems like we've gotten to the point where, shoot, they're all going to make it. Almost seems like almost everybody who's starting is going to be in the NFL at that level. And of course, we're talking about 2 of the top 3 or 4 programs in the country. So we're not talking about the Indiana-Illinois game, but still, they have their fair share of pros playing on the field. So to your point, Ferris, and I draw back to this experience very often. Jim Delaney, former Big Ten commissioner, I saw him at a small luncheon. So we're talking like 20 people having lunch. Fortunate enough, twice at ESPN to sit there with Jim Delaney, and he would speak for about an hour. Then he sat down. We had lunch, so I couldn't talk directly to the guy like one-on-one, but I could ask a couple questions. Mm-hmm. And he basically, in both of these talks, discussed his time in North Carolina as a varsity basketball player and said, this is what it looked like. And the way Jim Delaney led the Big Ten, you could very much see that he was in constant conflict between, I'm running big time athletics, I'm running a business, but I'm also trying to keep the academic portion of this. And I'm trying to merge both of these, and it's becoming more and more difficult because he said, as a varsity basketball player at North Carolina, so this is big time, he's going to Final Fours, this is in the late 60s, he said it was basically an extension of high school. You went to practice after your classes for 2 hours, you may have a couple of meetings during the week, but it's very much a extension of school, and you're a student. Sure, you have to do a lot of traveling during the season and all of that, but it's and then it's obviously, as it's become more and more competitive and there's been more money involved, the guidelines of how many hours you can dedicate to it have been stretched and stretched and stretched, and everything has been stretched. And basically, these athletes have a job now. It is a job for them to watch all the film, lift weights, there's no off season for the most part, and it's a job. I would love, this is never going to happen because there's too much money involved. I'd go back to 1955, and this would just be simply an extension of their student athlete role. And there was still an NFL in 1955, and they still recruited and drafted players from the collegiate ranks. They just wouldn't be nearly as good as they are now because it's a job. But we're never going to go there. So forget that. But that's what I would want.
Well, I'm not there. Athletes should get paid. I'm totally fine with all of that. They should make what they want.
Okay.
And go ahead.
That's not what I said. So nothing I said had anything to do with money. I believe that they should be paid. Absolutely, they should be paid. They've earned it. They are generating the income. So I would like it to be 1955 in that sense, to keep it somewhat pure. It wasn't completely pure in 1955. But here we are in 2024, and the sport generates so much money. I don't believe that the athletes shouldn't be paid. I'm a capitalist and a patriot to the hilt. I believe that they should be paid. They're earning money. They're working a job. It was ludicrous for everyone in the world to be able to make money except for college athletes for all that time. Shoot, there are 15-year-olds on TikTok making hundreds of thousands of dollars making stupid videos. Everybody should be able to make money. The market should determine how much you're worth. So I absolutely do agree with that. But I would like there to be a continued connection between, this is part of the requirement. You are a student athlete, and yes, you are being paid. You could be paid $10 million a year, but you still have to fulfill the requirements of a student, because that's why you're here.
You want the nostalgia of college football to maintain.
None of that I just stated impacts me. I don't know if they're going to class, passing tests, what's going on, getting their grades fixed. I have no idea, but I would like to think that that's happening.
I mean, unless you're North Carolina and some other schools like that, who, you make up classes. But I mean, I know like Michigan, for example, they just had a bunch of issue on the basketball team of kids not passing grades and being suspended for away games by Doug McDaniels, the point guard. So, I mean, there are some schools who uphold that, and I'm sure there will still be some schools that uphold that, like Michigan. But I mean, if we think North Carolina is the only one making up classes, that's just not it. I mean, I think you'll have your universities, Mark, that will do it, and I think you'll have your universities that just don't care. That's it.
Maybe I have the same psyche at my age that I did when I was first watching college and NFL football when I was 8 or 9 years old. I was an Ohio State fan, not because my family told me to be an Ohio State fan. I didn't know any Ohio State fans. I just became an Ohio State fan. I couldn't even tell you why. Yeah. I just gravitated to it. I think one reason was, I'm an Ohioan. I live here. These players mostly are recruited from these high schools and play here. I don't think I processed it quite like that when I was 8 years old, but something told me, okay, these guys are Ohioans. They play on my state team. I'm going to root for this team. I was a Dallas Cowboys fan in the NFL probably because I had the mindset, they're professionals. I don't care. They have the flashy uniforms and they're really good. They got the coach I like and the cheerleaders, and they're America's team. I'm going to like them. I don't have any ties to the Cleveland Browns or the Cincinnati Bengals. And I kind of differentiated that in my mind at the time. And I guess I'm still the same way.
Yeah. I mean, I can relate. I mean, Michigan, at a young age, I remember watching the Rose Bowl in '97 as a kid. So, in Charles Woodson, how do you not become a Michigan fan watching Charles Woodson? So, I mean, I don't know. I think it's, Mark, here's a question. You want these kids to still be student athletes. You want them to go to class and do everything that, the way it's been. But how do you know whether they are or they aren't? Isn't that more just a false belief in your mind where you're just where you want it to be true, but it doesn't mean it is?
And how are they University of Michigan football players then?
Because they put on the helmet and they play for the university. And after 3 years or 4, they get their degree.
Whose university? Not their university.
Well, I mean, look, all right. So when I went to college, for example, I had some classes with some football. I went to Eastern Michigan, and I had some classes with some of the football players. And I'm going to be honest with you, man. The tutors, they were there taking the notes, and they did a lot of their papers. Like I mean, like essentially, what happens is a football player will do a paper, right, and then the tutor will then proofread it and make it good. And then they'll review it and be like, all right, this is what I did, and then they'll submit it. Like the tutor, and I know that happens at bigger programs too, because I've talked to some former players, and you know, it's more or less like you go to class when you're able, but the tutors and they're given those programs or those resources, they do a lot of the work, man. I mean, that's just, I mean, but some of these kids, like there's some of these like, and I know you know this, Mark, some of these kids go for these degrees that are not much of a degree, but then there are some that get serious degrees. They get the engineering degree or the doctorate or whatever, right? I mean, I think it's just some will and some won't. It's just like some universities will enforce it and some won't.
I guess if you have your neighborhood pickup basketball team and I have mine, and we take pride in our neighborhood and you take pride in your neighborhood, and we play you and we find out your four best players are all from, across town somewhere, and you just shipped them in just to put the jersey on.
Yeah.
Then I don't feel so bad about losing. I figure they're really not any better than us.
Well, you had a player, Cardell Jones, a famous quote, Mark.
Sure.
No, I'm not saying like that as a negative. I'm just saying, like, did that make you like college football any less? Because I think he said the truth out loud. He's not the only one who feels that way, and that's not the only school. Like it's not an Ohio State thing at all. I mean, I think the reality of college athletics is a lot of them are only there. Like they do go to school and they are getting benefit, but I think they're there for sport, man. Because you're bred at a young age to be an athlete. That's what matters.
And there's something wrong with, because colleges and universities are built to prepare people for life.
Yeah.
To give them a trade, a skill, and theirs is football playing. Now, some of them, it's borderline as to whether, just like there are some that make the accounting program, but determine after a year, I don't have the brain to do this and pull this off, or whatever the field. It's the same in football. You can barely make the team, but I'm not going to make this a profession, so I'm going to have to do something else. But for the ones that are talented enough and stay healthy and do all those things, then they are that is part of their profession. But just like all those other, just like the skilled physicist and the skilled financier had to take all these other electives and classes that had nothing to do with their chosen field, then the football player has to do the same thing.
Yeah. To rack up debt. But yeah, I mean, unless you're in scholarship, right? But but my premise stands though. Like, did that make you like Ohio State less when Cardell Jones said that?
It's probably a small part of me.
But that national title felt good.
Not Ohio State, but just in general, just thinking, okay, he's just a representative of tons of athletes. Yes.
And he won you a national title though. That player, right? So I mean, he helped, third string quarterback, right? So I mean, I just think I think that's already happening, Mark. And I don't know, like, I think maybe you feel it's going to be more magnified or more, a more aggressive case down the road where less players are. I think in my opinion, though, honestly, I think the schools will still be schools. I think I think the athletes will still go to school. I just think some will take it more serious than others. Like I'll tell you this right now. I don't think Texas A&M gives a shit, because I know they have academic problems all the time at A&M. So with their athletes, so because there's been some kids that Michigan's reached out to, and there's academic issues all the time with them. So I don't know. I just think some schools it's a priority and some it won't be.
Well, at least for the football players, they can turn it into a career at the NFL level, or just make enough connections and professional connections that they can be helped down the road. despite not getting a legitimate degree. That's more legitimate in some ways than these other athletes who play non-revenue sports who don't give a crap about going to class. And I don't know what's going through their brains because they're really not preparing themselves for anything. So at least in football, there's a payoff, whether it's in the NFL or it's with NIL when you play at this level of program.
Right. Plus, there's life lessons in sports, right? So, I mean,
well, sure.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I think I don't know if too much will change, Mark. I don't know if it'll really. If we look at football today, and we say this revenue sharing model's in place, and there is a CBA, and let's say there's a Super League of 45 teams. I'm not sure that the environment of college sports is much different for the athlete or for the student. I don't know. That's something to, I guess, observe, but I don't know if it changes too much, Mark.
I guess the other portion of this that I don't know that seems to never be brought up that I would love to get some answers on is the taxpayers portion in all this. So if a football program or any sports team, Iowa women's basketball this past year, whatever the sports team, if they are sustainable on their own and self-sufficient, then at what level are all these other athletic programs being funded by taxpayers? I guess I have an issue with that to a certain extent as well.
Yeah, Michigan has sort of separate, not every school does this, but Michigan has separated the entire athletic department, as I understand it, from the academic wing, from a financial accounting perspective. But not every school is like that, So yeah, that's a really good point.